The first thing you need to understand about Major Alexia Reaper Voss is that she wasn't supposed to survive. Not the crash in Afghanistan that left her with a titanium rod in her left leg. Not the court-martial that followed when she refused to abandon a downed Marine unit against direct orders. And certainly not the quiet exile to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where broken pilots go to count inventory in the boneyard of forgotten aircraft. But there she was on that scorching Arizona morning, limping between the skeletal remains of decommissioned fighters, when the encrypted communication crackled through every radio on base. The transmission lasted exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds that would change everything. Mayday, Mayday, this is Overlord 6. We have catastrophic failure. Repeat, catastrophic failure. All primary assets are down. Requesting immediate CAS support, any available aircraft, grid coordinates follow. The voice belonged to General Marcus Kane, the same man who had personally overseen her demotion and transfer. The same man who had declared, in front of a room full of brass, that Major Voss was operationally finished and would never fly combat missions again. Base Commander Colonel Hayes burst into the operations center, his face pale as he absorbed the intelligence reports flooding in. A joint special operations task force had been compromised deep in hostile territory. Satellite imagery showed multiple enemy armored units converging on their position. The nearest F-16s were still 2 hours out. Apache helicopters couldn't penetrate the sophisticated air defense network without unacceptable losses. "Sir," came a hesitant voice from the communications desk, "there is one aircraft technically mission-ready on the field." Colonel Hayes turned, and through the reinforced glass windows of the tower, his gaze fell upon the most unlikely savior imaginable. Sitting on the tarmac like a wounded bird was tail number 810964, an A-10 Thunderbolt II that had been scheduled for depot maintenance. Its titanium bathtub cockpit was scarred from countless missions, its twin engines blackened from years of combat sorties. It looked exactly like what it was, a machine built to absorb punishment and keep fighting. "That's not possible," Hayes muttered. "The maintenance logs show she's been down for parts for 3 weeks." But even as he spoke, they could see someone moving around the aircraft with the fluid efficiency of a combat veteran. Someone who had been working 16-hour days in the desert heat, quietly preparing for a moment that everyone assumed would never come. The morning sun caught the pilot's flight suit as she performed her pre-flight inspection, checking control surfaces with the methodical precision that separates the living from the dead in aerial combat. Her movements carried the weight of someone who had learned hard lessons about what happens when you trust your life to anything less than perfection. Every rivet, every hydraulic line, every piece of ordnance received the same careful attention. Major Voss had been rebuilding more than just an aircraft during her months in exile. She had been rebuilding herself, preparing for redemption that might never come. The irony was not lost on anyone watching from the tower. The pilot they had written off as damaged goods might be the only thing standing between a decorated general and a very public, very catastrophic failure. The encrypted radio frequency erupted with increasingly desperate updates from the battlefield. Enemy armor was closing fast. Air support was still 90 minutes out. Time was becoming the most precious commodity in a situation where every second meant the difference between extraction and annihilation. Colonel Hayes reached for his radio, knowing he was about to make a decision that would either save careers or destroy them. In the distance, the A-10's engines began to spool up with their distinctive low-frequency howl, a sound that meant salvation to American ground forces and terror to anyone foolish enough to point weapons in their direction. The general had declared her finished, but Major Alexia Voss was about to prove that some things are too stubborn to die quietly. Hayes keyed his microphone with the weight of desperate necessity. "Reaper, you're cleared for immediate launch. Authentication code follows." Major Voss didn't respond immediately. She was running through mental calculations that had kept her alive through 96 combat sorties. Distance to target, fuel consumption, ordnance load, weather conditions, enemy air defenses. The mathematics of modern warfare reduced to a series of variables that would determine whether she brought everyone home or added her name to another memorial wall. Her hands moved across the cockpit controls with muscle memory earned through thousands of hours in similar aircraft. Master arms switched to ARM, targeting systems online, navigation waypoints programmed. She was transforming from maintenance officer back into the precision instrument of controlled violence that had once made her one of the Air Force's most effective close air support pilots. Tower Reaper copies all, requesting immediate taxi clearance. The voice that came through the radio carried none of the uncertainty that had characterized her recent months. This was the voice that had guided Marines through 3 separate Taliban ambushes in the Hindu Kush. The voice that had coordinated with Army Rangers during the bloodiest firefight of the Iraq Surge. The voice that had earned her 17 air medals and a distinguished flying cross before politics and pride destroyed her career. Colonel Hayes watched the A-10 taxi toward the runway, its nose-mounted GAU-8 cannon pointing forward like the finger of judgment. The aircraft might have been built in the 1970s, but it had been designed for exactly this type of mission. Low-altitude, close air support in a high-threat environment. The kind of flying that separated true combat pilots from everyone else who merely wore the uniform. Reaper, be advised you'll be operating in denied airspace with minimal support. Copy that, Tower. Wouldn't be the first time. The understatement carried years of bitter experience. Major Voss had spent her career flying missions that other pilots considered suicidal. Deep interdiction strikes against heavily defended targets. Combat search and rescue in areas where surface-to-air missiles bloomed like deadly flowers. She had developed a reputation for bringing damaged aircraft home from places where lesser pilots never returned. But reputation meant nothing now. All that mattered was the desperate voice on the radio calling for help, and the unlikely aircraft that might be able to provide it. The A-10 reached the runway threshold, its pilot completing final systems checks with the thoroughness of someone who understood that shortcuts in aviation usually result in very permanent mistakes. Control surfaces tested, weapons systems armed, emergency procedures reviewed. She was methodically preparing to fly into a situation that had already claimed multiple aircraft and threatened to become a strategic disaster. Tower, Reaper ready for immediate departure. Cleared for takeoff, Reaper. Bring them home. The Thunderbolt's twin turbofan engines spooled up to full military power, their combined 36,000 pounds of thrust accelerating the heavily armored aircraft down the runway. Despite carrying maximum ordnance, the A-10 lifted off with the purposeful determination of a machine designed for exactly this mission profile. As it climbed into the harsh desert sky, everyone watching from the tower understood they had just witnessed something that would be remembered long after the official reports were filed and forgotten. Major Voss was flying toward her redemption or her destruction, and at this point, the distinction had become largely academic. The flight to the target area would take 43 minutes at maximum cruise speed, 43 minutes for Major Voss to mentally prepare for what awaited her in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Intelligence reports indicated at least 2 armored personnel carriers, multiple technicals, and sophisticated man-portable air defense systems. The kind of environment that had already claimed 2 Apache helicopters and forced the abort of a planned F-16 strike package. But intelligence reports never captured the full complexity of combat. They couldn't convey the weight of responsibility that came with being someone's only hope of survival. They couldn't describe the peculiar combination of fear and focus that characterized the final moments before engaging an enemy that wanted nothing more than to kill you and everyone you were trying to protect. Overlord 6, this is Reaper inbound your position. Request updated situation report. General Kane's voice came through the radio with the strained composure of someone maintaining professional demeanor while under direct fire. "Reaper, Overlord 6. Be advised we have enemy armor in direct engagement, approximately 800 meters northeast of our position. Multiple casualties require immediate evacuation." The clinical language of military radio protocol couldn't disguise the desperation in his transmission. This was a general who had spent his career sending other people to fight his battles, now trapped in a situation where his survival depended entirely on the skill and courage of a pilot he had written off as unsuitable for combat duty. Major Voss checked her navigation display and confirmed her approach vector. The terrain below was unforgiving, steep ridgelines and narrow valleys that channeled aircraft into predictable flight paths where enemy gunners could concentrate their fire. This was not a place for hesitation or tactical mistakes. One wrong turn, one moment of uncertainty, and she would join the growing list of casualties that had turned a routine operation into a strategic nightmare. "Overlord 6, Reaper has your position visual. Beginning target acquisition." Through her targeting pod, Major Voss could see the tactical situation developing with crystalline clarity. American forces had taken defensive positions among a cluster of mud brick buildings at the base of a steep valley. Enemy vehicles were advancing from multiple directions, using the terrain to mask their approach until the final moments before engagement. It was a textbook tactical situation that required precise coordination between air and ground forces. But precision required trust, and trust was something that had been in short supply since her court-martial. The first surface-to-air missile launched just as she began her initial attack run. Major Voss saw the telltale smoke trail rising from the ridgeline to her east and immediately began evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares while maintaining her attack heading. The A-10 was built to absorb punishment, but that didn't mean taking unnecessary risks with sophisticated air defense systems. "Reaper taking fire, continuing attack." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This was what she had trained for during thousands of hours in simulators and live-fire exercises. The moment when years of preparation crystallized into a few seconds of controlled violence that would determine whether people lived or died. The GAU-8 cannon began its distinctive buzzing roar, each burst sending depleted uranium rounds downrange at nearly twice the speed of sound. The first enemy vehicle disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. The second tried to reverse course, but caught a Maverick missile that transformed it into a burning monument to tactical miscalculation. But the mission was far from over. Intelligence reports had underestimated both the number of enemy forces and their level of sophistication. This wasn't a simple hit-and-run operation by local insurgents. This was a coordinated assault by well-equipped forces with professional military training and advanced weapon systems. "Overlord 6, Reaper has eliminated 2 targets, but I'm seeing movement from at least 6 additional positions. This is going to take multiple attack runs," which meant multiple opportunities for the enemy to find her range, multiple chances for a lucky shot to bring down the only aircraft capable of providing immediate close air support. Major Voss understood the mathematics of aerial combat better than most. Every attack run increased the probability of mission failure, but there was no alternative. The people on the ground were counting on her to stay in the fight regardless of the personal risk. This was the moment she had been preparing for during all those months in exile. Not just the tactical challenge of defeating a well-armed enemy, but the deeper test of whether she still possessed the moral courage to risk everything for people who had questioned her judgment and fitness for duty. General Kane's voice crackled through her headset. "Reaper, we have wounded requiring immediate evacuation. Can you suppress enemy positions long enough for extraction?" The question carried weight beyond mere tactical coordination. This was the same general who had declared her career finished, now asking her to risk everything to save his life and the lives of his people. The irony was perfect and bitter, but Major Voss had learned long ago that combat had a way of reducing complex political situations to very simple choices. You either brought people home or you didn't. Everything else was just conversation. Overlord 6 Reaper copies. Beginning suppression runs now. She rolled the A-10 into a steep banking turn that brought her around to attack the enemy positions from an unexpected vector. The aircraft shuddered as small arms fire from the ground found its armored hull, but the titanium bathtub surrounding her cockpit had been designed to absorb exactly this type of punishment. She was flying a machine that had been built to survive in the most dangerous airspace on Earth. The second attack run eliminated 3 more enemy vehicles, but also drew fire from a previously undetected air defense system. Major Voss felt the aircraft take hits along the left wing and immediately ran through her emergency procedures checklist. Hydraulic pressure dropping, warning lights cascading across her instrument panel. The A-10 was wounded but still flying, still fighting. Overlord 6, Reaper is taking significant damage but can continue mission. What she didn't mention was that her fuel state was becoming critical. The combination of high-speed maneuvering and battle damage had increased consumption beyond acceptable margins. She was approaching the point where she would need to choose between completing the mission and having enough fuel to make it home. For Major Voss, it wasn't really a choice at all. The third attack run silenced the remaining enemy positions, but at a cost that became apparent as soon as she tried to climb back to a safe altitude. The A-10's left engine was streaming smoke and losing power. Multiple systems were operating in backup mode. The aircraft was dying around her, but it was still flying, still capable of protecting the forces on the ground. Reaper Overlord 6, enemy contact has ceased, outstanding work. General Kane's voice carried grudging respect that hadn't been present in their previous communications. He was beginning to understand that he had been wrong about more than just Major Voss's capabilities. He had been wrong about what it meant to be a professional military officer. But the mission wasn't over. The evacuation helicopter was still 15 minutes out, and intelligence reports indicated additional enemy forces moving toward the area. Major Voss would need to maintain overwatch despite her aircraft's deteriorating condition and her own critically low fuel state. Overlord 6, Reaper will maintain position until extraction is complete. It was a commitment that might cost her everything, but it was also the culmination of a career spent putting mission success above personal considerations. This was who she had always been, even when the people around her had failed to recognize it. This was why she had rebuilt that A-10 during months of exile, preparing for a moment that everyone assumed would never come. The evacuation helicopter appeared as a distant speck against the mountain ridgeline, growing larger as it approached the landing zone that Major Voss was defending with an aircraft that was held together more by determination than structural integrity. Her left engine finally seized completely, forcing her to shut it down and continue flying on single-engine power. The mathematics of her situation were becoming increasingly grim. Single-engine flight time in an A-10 was limited under the best circumstances, and these were far from the best circumstances. She was operating a severely damaged aircraft at high altitude in thin air, with barely enough fuel for a normal return flight, much less the extended loitering time required to protect the evacuation. Overlord 6, extraction helicopter is on final approach. Maintain defensive positions until I give the all-clear. Her voice betrayed none of the concern that was building as she watched her fuel gauges approach minimum levels. Professional pilots learned early in their careers to compartmentalize fear and focus on the tasks that would keep them alive. Everything else was just distraction from the core mission of bringing people home safely. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its crew immediately beginning to load the wounded, while Major Voss circled overhead like a guardian angel with failing engines. She was burning fuel she didn't have to provide protection that might mean the difference between successful extraction and catastrophic loss. Reaper Overlord 6. All personnel are loaded and we're lifting off now. Thanks for the cover. Copy that, Overlord 6. Safe flight home. What Major Voss didn't say was that her own safe flight home was becoming increasingly doubtful. The A-10 was flying on borrowed time, held aloft by redundant systems that were failing one by one. She turned toward Davis-Monthan Air Force Base with the knowledge that she might not make it, but also with the satisfaction of knowing she had completed the mission that everyone thought was beyond her capabilities. The flight home became a masterclass in emergency aviation procedures. Major Voss nursed her crippled aircraft through mountain passes that would challenge even a fully functional plane. The A-10's legendary durability was being tested to its absolute limits, but it kept flying, kept carrying her toward home and redemption. She declared an emergency when she reached the outer marker for Davis-Monthan, alerting crash rescue teams to prepare for a possible catastrophic landing. The aircraft was hemorrhaging hydraulic fluid and operating on minimal electrical power. Her instruments were failing systematically, forcing her to rely on basic flying skills that had been honed through decades of experience. Tower, Reaper declaring emergency approach. Aircraft is severely damaged with multiple system failures. Roger, Reaper. Emergency crews are standing by. Runway is clear and ready. Colonel Hayes stood in the control tower, watching through binoculars as the battered A-10 approached from the east. Even from a distance, he could see the extent of battle damage. Smoke trailing from the left engine nacelle. Obvious holes in the wing surfaces. Landing gear that might or might not function properly when called upon. But the aircraft was still flying, still responding to pilot inputs, still carrying home the pilot who had just accomplished something that would be discussed in military academies for decades to come. Major Voss extended her landing gear and was relieved to see 3 green lights indicating proper deployment. The A-10 touched down hard but straight, rolling out with the controlled urgency of an aircraft that had given everything it had to complete one final mission. She brought it to a stop just as the remaining engine began to lose power, having literally flown until there was nothing left to give. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft as Major Voss completed her shutdown procedures with the methodical thoroughness that had characterized every aspect of her flying career. She was home, alive, and vindicated in ways that went far beyond simple mission success. As she climbed down from the cockpit, Colonel Hayes was waiting with an expression that mixed relief, respect, and something approaching awe. The pilot he had watched taxi out that morning was not the same person who had just climbed out of that battle-damaged aircraft. Major Voss had been transformed by fire and emerged as something harder and more valuable than anyone had realized. Outstanding work, Major. That was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed. She nodded acknowledgement, but her attention was already shifting to the post-mission requirements that would occupy the next several hours. Debriefing, maintenance assessment, after-action reports, the bureaucratic aftermath of combat that was every bit as important as the fighting itself. But first, there was one more radio call to make. Overlord 6 Reaper, mission complete, all personnel accounted for and safe. General Kane's response came through clearly despite the distance. Reaper, Overlord 6, message received and understood, thank you. 2 words that carried the weight of professional recognition and personal redemption. Major Alexia, Reaper, Voss had proven that some things are too important to be destroyed by politics and pride. She had shown that competence and courage are not diminished by bureaucratic disapproval. The general had declared her finished, but she had emerged from fire, torn but flying, ready to fight another day. The maintenance assessment of tail number 810964 revealed the full extent of damage that Major Voss had overcome during her flight home. 17 separate impact points from small arms fire, complete hydraulic system failure in the left wing, significant structural damage to control surfaces, engine components that had operated far beyond safe parameters. But the aircraft had held together long enough to complete the mission and return home safely. Like its pilot, the A-10 had proven that determination and engineering excellence could overcome almost any obstacle when lives depended on performance under pressure. The after-action reports painted a picture of tactical excellence under the most demanding conditions. Major Voss had single-handedly turned a potential strategic disaster into a successful combat operation. Her precision flying and weapons delivery had eliminated multiple enemy targets while protecting friendly forces throughout a complex evacuation operation. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of moral courage that military institutions claim to value but rarely recognize when it conflicts with political convenience. She had risked everything to save people who had questioned her competence and fitness for duty. Within hours of her return, Major Voss received notification that General Kane had personally submitted a recommendation for her immediate promotion and return to combat status. The same general who had declared her career finished was now acknowledging that he had been profoundly wrong about her capabilities and character. But vindication came with its own complexities. Major Voss understood that one successful mission, however dramatic, could not erase the institutional damage that had been done during her court-martial and subsequent exile. Military careers were built over decades, not single afternoons, regardless of how heroic those afternoons might be. She also understood that her actions that day would be remembered and discussed long after the politics that had nearly destroyed her career were forgotten. She had added her name to the short list of military aviators whose skill and courage had changed the course of history through individual acts of professional excellence. The story of Major Alexia Reaper Voss would become part of military folklore, passed down through generations of pilots as an example of what it meant to serve with honor and distinction regardless of personal cost. Her call sign would be remembered not for the destruction she had dealt to enemies, but for the lives she had saved and the principles she had upheld. Years later, when young pilots asked about the meaning of professional dedication, instructors would tell them about the pilot who rebuilt an A-10 in the Arizona desert while waiting for redemption that might never come. They would describe how she answered the call when everyone else had failed, flying a damaged aircraft into hostile territory because people's lives depended on her competence and courage. They would explain that military service, at its highest level, required the willingness to sacrifice everything for principles and people who might not appreciate the magnitude of that sacrifice. They would emphasize that true professionals measured success not by recognition or advancement, but by the more demanding standard of mission completion and honor preserved. The general had declared her finished, but Major Voss had proven that some things transcend the judgments of fallible human institutions. Courage, competence, and moral clarity cannot be destroyed by bureaucratic disapproval or political miscalculation. They endure, waiting for the moment when they are needed most. That moment had come on a scorching desert morning when an A-10 emerged from fire, torn but flying, carrying its pilot toward a redemption that had been earned through months of preparation and a lifetime of service. Major Alexia Reaper Voss had reminded everyone that the best military professionals are not those who never face adversity, but those who overcome it with grace and determination. Her story would continue, but this chapter had ended with the kind of vindication that cannot be granted by promotion boards or efficiency reports. She had proven her worth in the most demanding arena of all, combat operations where failure meant death and success meant bringing everyone home alive. The A-10 would eventually be repaired and returned to service, ready to carry other pilots into other battles. But tail number 810964 would always be remembered as the aircraft that carried Major Voss back from professional exile to tactical triumph, demonstrating that both pilot and machine possessed qualities that transcended the limitations of bureaucratic judgment. In the end, competence speaks louder than politics, and courage endures longer than the institutional forces that attempt to suppress it. Major Alexia, Reaper, Voss had proven both principles on a single afternoon when she emerged from fire, torn but flying, ready to serve with distinction for as long as her country required her skills and dedication.